Who describes sexuality as a central aspect of being human throughout life, encompasses sex, gender identities, and roles, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and reproduction. Sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. While sexuality can include all of these dimensions, not all of them are always experienced or expressed. So, the definition and the history of sexuality is pretty well known, but something that is not well known and is difficult to find is the history of homosexuality, because there are no distinct gay people due to the lack of the concept of homosexuality. So, in ancient Greece, men would have looked for other men for sexual exploits, but would happily take a female, and then he would go home to his wife. But that didn't necessarily mean that he was a homosexual, because there was no word for homosexual. It was just men enjoying sexual exploits. So that wasn't necessarily that ancient cultures were more tolerant. It's just that no one cared who men slept with. Muslim spiritualists as well, around the same time, adored the beauty of youthful men as a pathway for adoring God, and some men liked men for more sensuous reasons, obviously. But for women during this time, there was something called Victorian sexual silence / repression, and even though that was a thing, it still had its benefits for lesbians and women who liked women. So close female-female companionship was celebrated and was not seen as sexual ever. Even if the woman was like, I want to kiss my friend, it was not seen as sexual. It was just seen as two gal pals having fun. And Sharon Marcus argues that intimate female partnerships during this time bolstered conventional Victorian marriages. So they thought that, the closer you are to your friends, the better marriage you have. So, in the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a gay and lesbian subculture that flourished in Germany, and Nazi Germany even believed that men having sex with other men could rehabilitate soldiers. And then in the 1950s and 60s London, respectable homosexual men, so this would mean men who could pass as being straight or traditionally masculine men, were tolerated, but they were never accepted, and feminine men were just absolutely discriminated against. So some key people that would be related to homosexuality over the history of homosexuality are ancient Greek women Sappho and Alcman. They were both thought to write about their desire for other women, and Alcman even wrote hymns which discuss her attraction to women. Queen Christina of Sweden was widely considered to be a lesbian as well. She loved reading Sappho, and her love letters were found after her death between her and a quote-unquote friend. Barbara Giddings, she was an activist. She founded the New York chapter of the Daughters of Bilitis. She picketed the White House. She counseled gay people who were discriminated by the government. There was Audre Lorde, Black lesbian feminist mother poet. She fought injustices through writing literature in the 20th century. There was Del Martin and Phyllis Leon. They were one of America's best known lesbian couples. They founded the very first Daughter of Bilitis, and the Daughter of Bilitis is the first social and political organization for lesbians. And there's also Barbara Jordan. She was the first Southern Black lesbian to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. So not much is known about the history of lesbianism due to the patriarchy, and not much is known about women's sexual health as well, and their sexuality because of the patriarchy. And so what health risks are lesbians prone to as a community? Not much is known about female-female relationships, so obviously there's going to be some issues. And so lesbians are, and other WLW, which are women loving women, so this also includes bisexual women. So women dating women are at a higher risk for depression and anxiety, and this could be due to social alienation, rejection by loved ones, abuse, discrimination. They're also at a high risk of substance abuse, and this includes tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs, and this is usually a coping mechanism for being socially alienated, but also their reliance on bars as social venues and targeted advertising in lesbian publications don't really help that. And so when you have excessive smokers, then you have heart disease. So heart disease, cardiovascular disease are are very common in lesbians due to smoking, and obesity, which is also more common in lesbians than straight women. And while lesbians aren't more prone to breast cancer and any kind of like gynecological, like vaginal, cervical cancers, they're not more prone, but they are way less likely to be screened for them because they have no need to go. They feel like they don't have a need to go to a clinic because they're not, getting birth control or like other contraceptives or for like childbearing reasons generally. So in addition to the health risks, there are also barriers that lesbians often face in healthcare, and the first one is that in most cases lesbians can't participate in their partner's employment benefit package. So if there's someone who's not working, the other one is not going to be able to visit, and even when they do visit a clinic, they often don't disclose their sexual orientation because of discrimination. And it says here that some healthcare providers don't screen lesbians for cervical cancer at all because they base it on the assumption that they've never had sex with men, and that's very dangerous and also incorrect because some lesbians have reported cervical dysplasia. So are healthcare providers misinformed or careless, and how can we change these things? So I believe that there should be open dialogue in the office amongst colleagues, that no one is to be discriminated against based on sexual orientation, and that language that physicians use with their patients and language used in their questionnaires and forms be more inclusive. So what that means is, instead of saying, when asking for their relationship status, say, are you single, married, widowed, divorced, or do you have a domestic partner? Or instead of assuming and saying boyfriend or husband, use terms like partner and spouse. Another really important thing to fix some of this, I think, is for physicians to be a resource for health information about sexual orientation for both patients and families, and include like community resources. And it's really important because sex ed is not inclusive. So, less than 1 in 10 LGBT youth receive sex ed that included their identities. So what this means is that, lesbians aren't learning proper, how to use contraceptives as females, and focus of sex ed that is shared, like STD transmission and contraceptives, is heterosexually focused. It's often religious based, which homosexuality to many Christians goes against their religion. So instead of being shame-based and religious-based, it should be more science-based and factual. Sex and STDs for lesbians, and honestly everyone, is inevitable, so we might as well start teaching lesbian youth about them in comprehensive inclusive sex ed classes. The entire LGBT community should be included in sex ed curriculum so that they can be informed and make conscious choices about their overall and sexual health. So, yeah, that's my paper. I linked sexuality and homosexuality to risk factors for lesbians, and risk factors for lesbians to why we need LGBTQ sex education. So, yeah.
Thank you.